Sports Cutting Edge for ASTN, the Australian Sports Technologies Network. Here's your host, Lachie Wills.
We're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the Australian Sports Technologies Network. My great honour now to chat with the legend, the founder himself, Mr. James Demetriou. James, thank you for your time. How do you feel?
Very ecstatic tonight and relieved in one area. It's a bit like playing a grand final.
Yeah.
It's taken us 10 years to get there, so it's a great night to sort of celebrate, but it's been a very, very long haul.
It has, and I love the grand final analogy because, you know, I want to talk about your life more broadly because it is one of the great stories of modern Australia. Your mum and dad, Chrissy and Tony, came to Australia from Cyprus 1951. 4 years later, you're born, the oldest of four boys. You grew up in the northern suburbs. And I know your mum and dad had a fish and chip shop on Bell Street. And the bloke who used to bring in the potatoes one day bought in a pair of footy boots. And that started...
He actually bought a football in, actually.
He bought a footy in.
Yeah.
And that starts a VFL career, AFL, as we say it in the modern parlance. Can I ask you, those years, the early days, growing up, your family, what sort of influence did that have on the man you are today?
I think my parents instilled us in a very strong work ethic, and they also had very strong values, you know, so respect and trust, relationships, work ethic, education were really cornerstones of, and modesty and humility. My mum was very strong on us not being outspoken, and so those sort of went all the way through us. And you got to think, we have four boys, so we were in a house behind the shop, so there was only 2 bedrooms, so you had 4 boys in 1 bedroom, so you had 2 bunks, you know, one each, one up, and you can just imagine what 4 boys were doing with bunks and everything from World Championship Wrestling, tag team and all of that sort of stuff. But life was, the one thing we had a great family connections with cousins, and so there were picnics and other things that we didn't go out just by ourselves. We were normally groups of about 20 people, and they had children as well. So that meant that we were playing sport all the time. It was either football, cricket or tennis, either at Donnybrook or at Elwood Beach, and occasionally Bacchus Marsh as well. So so these were great big days when we grew up in an environment where family was absolutely number one, and then and the work ethic and the education really sort of went through the whole family in terms of our values.
Well, work ethic, I mean, your career is a testament to that. Now, in terms of football, I want to take you back to round 1, 1975, Windy Hill. Essendon, your club, playing St Kilda. Correct. You make your debut as a league footballer.
Correct. 16
touches, you kick a goal, you beat the Saints by 69 points. What did that feel like? And you're the first player for Essendon of Hellenic background.
Correct.
What did it feel like to run out on Windy Hill as a league footballer?
It was a culmination of a lot of hard work. I wasn't blessed with size, so I had to work much harder than everyone else with my speed and skills, etc. And also, I was at law school at Melbourne University at the same time. So here am I trying to, do a full-time, study of a very decent degree at a great university, and then trying to play football. So leading up to it, not much sleep the night before, and then playing over at Windy Hill that particular day. I always remember it was a sort of a bit of an overcast day, a bit of dampness in the air, and it was a very big crowd, and we played against some very good players, like there was Demetriou and Neil and all those sort of guys, George Young and everyone else playing. So it was a really great initiation, I suppose, because you're playing one of the toughest teams in the league at that stage, and we blew them out of the park. And I always remember it because in that first quarter, when I hadn't got a touch for the first 10 minutes, Graham Moss, the Brownlow medal in ruckman, tapped a ball, and I was running at 100 miles an hour, and it just hit me right there, and I was able to sort of hit Alan Noonan with a stab pass that almost knocked his wind out of him. So he ended up kicking a goal out of it. So there was that, and then there was all the tough guys like Robbie Muir absolutely going ballistic out in the wing, wanting to hit everyone that moved, and then getting chased by Carl Dittrich and Cowboy Neil into the pocket. So, we're talking about some really, the 70s were a very hard era. So if you weren't fast and you got hit, you were hit, and it was head-high stuff in those days. So, you're talking about a career that I ended up with 7 serious bad concussions out of football, 3 broken nose, a broken leg, a broken wrist, all playing league football and trying to do a law degree at the same time. So my life was pretty busy. I'd study, leave the university at 4:30 and then hop on a tram, the 59 tram down Flemington Road up Mount Road, off to the Essendon Footy Club. And then some of those early days, I used to ride my bike from home to training when I was home. So Windy Hill to Pascoe Vale, and that was unheard of. So, yeah, so look, it was a great era. Des Tuddenham, he was a pretty hard taskmaster. Alan Noon and a few other great, Ken Fletcher and a few other guys. So it was really great. I never thought I'd actually get there. So when I got there, I was probably more shocked than actually anticipating I'd earned it.
Well, you know, I mean, it's the one thing that's constant that I'm hearing from you so far, just that bloody determination. Yeah. How proud were your mum and dad of you running out on Windy Hill that day? Do you remember chatting to them that night? What did they say?
Well, not much, because I think it was all just too much for them. But I mean, you got to remember, Andrew was the one that they followed a lot more because they'd retired, but they were still working. So obviously what had happened is that, you know, I think they didn't actually come. And my mother only went to one football game and she never went ever again.
Oh, wow, because
that was Andrew who got knocked out by Lee Matthews in one of the finals in '82. Yeah. So there was all of that, but that didn't worry me. I think my wife, who's my partner, 43 years, she came, which was great. Yeah. But in those days, it was almost like a blur. Yeah. I mean, you get to the ground. You know, in those days we had red shorts, not black or black or. Right. Yeah, Des Tuddenham wanted to give us red shorts and red boots. You know, it was obscene. It was the '70s, right? But that was all right. I mean, my parents are pretty proud. Yeah. And I got a photo with my partner at the time. So, yeah. Magic. But really, you know, in the end result, it was just for me a big shock getting there. I got a lot of great telegrams, but finally got there and, you know, I played, I think, 9 games.
Well, and that's the thing, your career cut short cruelly by injury the following season at Waverley Park, a game against Fitzroy, and there's a sprinkler sticking out of the ground. You fall over that, break your leg, and that's really the end of the league football career. But then the fact that you transition out of that, I can imagine, bitter disappointment, and then achieve so much. As a law degree at Melbourne University, you're the first person from your high school, Newland, to ever get a law degree. Correct. Can I ask you, the way that you then established yourself in law, in business, in commerce, can you talk us through that journey, those years, through your 20s, your 30s?
On that breaking the leg, it had a really bad side to it, but the good side of it was that I actually ended up having to be able to study for the full year, you know, even though I had a cast on and my walking sticks, etc., which was a bit difficult on some of the theatres, as you can imagine, in those days. No O-H and S in those days. But I actually passed because I was carrying, you know, I did 7.5 subjects that year. And if I hadn't have broken my leg, I don't think I would have got through. So in some respects, it was a blessing. Yeah. And sport was something I loved, as opposed to wanting to make it a profession. Yeah. Because a lot of the players I played didn't have professions to go to. So football was almost their holy grail for them. So then I finished law at Melbourne University, did my articles, worked with a former Essendon director at his firm for a number of years, got pretty sick of it, and then did a part-time teaching at a couple of private schools, which sort of showed me what the other side was like, and wasn't what I liked. So I then started my own practice, and it was a very successful practice for a number of years. I sold it, and then I joined a major law firm in Melbourne, and then basically headed up a banking and finance section of this law firm. Tried to become a partner of the firm, but in the 90s, a partner coming from the wrong side of the tracks and the wrong school and the wrong colour couldn't earn me a partnership. I got an extra $100,000 salary, but they weren't prepared to make me a partner. So I decided to move on, and then I started my own practice, specialising in about 6 or 7 very large Asian clients, and becoming not so much a lawyer but more of an advisor to them. I learned a lot out of that and had a lot of tripping around Asia. And at the same time, I got a job part-time writing detailed research reports for the federal government on Australian issues, you know, market entry into Asian countries. Yeah. And then in 97, 98, I joined the Essendon board, which we'll get to in a moment, but got very ill. And I was out of work for almost 2 years. So I took a sabbatical, went back and did an executive master's at Melbourne again in business, and then had another year off. And then I got a scholarship to Anderson Business School at UCLA, which is where I learnt all about technology and marketing and how to pitch to raise money, etc. And then from then on, really, my career has been very heavily involved in startups, technology, commercialisation. And I learnt a lot from that because I also learnt that Australian companies weren't prepared properly to be able to, commercialise their products globally. And that was one of the valuable lessons I learnt, which I took back to the ASTN.
And you've certainly brought that to life. I want to pull one point you made there, the fact that there were those barriers. Obviously, Australia has changed a lot since your mum and dad came here in 1951 and continues to do so. What you did with Sports Without Borders with your son Tom in 2006 was all about bringing greater equality and opportunity to people from diverse backgrounds. Can I ask, growing up in that time in Australia, how much did that inform you and who you are today, and also the way in which you've tried to bring about equality and bring down barriers so that other people don't have to sort of suffer at the other end of that like you did?
Good question. We were fortunate because my dad had the shop. Everyone knew my dad, basically in the whole area of Pascoe Vale.
Yeah.
And I'd been seen, I was playing very good football at my primary school, Coburg North. I had a great headmaster, Jack Ware, who really looked after us. And then my dad was approached in the shop by one of the customers who happened to be on the board of the Pascoe Vale Football Club, and they got me over to play at Pascoe Vale. So sport becomes a very inclusive thing, and what it does, I always use to open yourself to the Australian culture and psyche. Someone's got to give you a window or open a door into that, and sport is one of those openers. And so I was able to, and the whole family, we all played at Pascoe Vale, very welcoming. It was tough, but at least we'd broken down a lot of the barriers. We were very good. All of us were top-notch, at football and cricket in those days. And so we were accepted, greatly by the club. And I thought that was the norm. But when I look back, there was probably, for the four of us getting through, there's probably another 400 or 500 who missed out and couldn't play sport in Australia. Because people have got to remember this. We had a white Australia policy in Australia from 1880 to 1972, which was repealed by the Whitlam government. So you can just imagine what Australia was like. It was an Anglo-Celtic country, and then we had a whole lot of migrants who hit this place in the 50s and 60s. So, racism and ignorance was pretty well, front and centre. So sport was the thing that actually got us across that line, accepted and everything else. And I thought that was the norm. And I thought that was something that every Australian child had the right to. Real through 2006, my son Tom is doing a postgraduate at a new media at Swinburne. He's been asked to do a campaign on non-for-profits. And I'm getting a phone call from my friend George Lakakis, who's the chairman of the Victorian Multicultural Foundation, who's saying, James, we've got some problems. We've got all these refugees, newly arrived migrants who can't play sport in this country. And I said, why? Well, they've got no money to pay for the fees and they haven't got any gear. So I said to Tom, why don't we make the campaign for your assignment this? And then from there it grew. We got a number of grants. We rolled for, and we had, the most important thing is we got this program called SIX, which was inclusiveness through sport, so effectively. And what we were able to do is put 40,000 kids and their parents and volunteer into sporting clubs with scholarships from, paying their fees or buying them boots, or buying them their clothes, and that was $1 million plus helping these kids. And these were refugee kids from East Africa, Middle East, Myanmar, some of the worst, Cambodia, some of these places that people had really suffered from, and they couldn't play sport. And the way you look at it is if you can go to Sydney, in Western Sydney, there's a whole bunch of kids playing on an oval, and there's 400 refugee kids sitting on the sideline watching because they couldn't play at the club. We went to the local RSL and we said, why don't you support these kids? And the local RSL said, well, their parents don't play the pokies and drink, so we can't support them. So we put a lot of money in, and we also gave Craig Foster a fair bit of money to help do the soccer in Sydney. So we did all that. And so in effect, what we did is we broke down some serious barriers. We got all these kids in there. Plus, I think we also shamed government and people to say, like particularly soccer, the most expensive sport in Australia. It's basically now vacancy for middle class kids who can afford to have their kids play soccer in this country. Whereas football and other things were much cheaper, and we were able to support kids. with them to be able to play sport. And it's still a problem. The cost of sports, we backed 10% of those kids, those 400 of those kids, we actually got them into international clubs. A couple of kids to Arsenal, NBA and a whole bunch of stuff, all from scholarships we gave. But the average kid was getting paid $13,000 if they were an elite sports person.
Yeah.
So we backed the Australia's 800 metre champion. So we backed Bashahuli, we backed him. So we backed a whole lot of kids that we thought out of the 10%, and we backed those kids to sort of get an elite level.
Isn't that just tremendous? You know, and it's like you're paying it forward because the bloke who bought the potatoes bought a footy one day to you, and you go and do this with your son Tom.
And you never forget that because
I bet.
Harold gave us a second-hand football that he got from the Brunswick Football Club.
Yeah.
Now that football never touched the ground; it was polished every night. Now,
Yeah.
why that was important was we used to play day and night sport at the Woolworths car park on the weekend. Because in those days, supermarkets closed at 1 o'clock. So from 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock at night on Sunday, it was football or cricket on a a hard surface, right?
The bitumen.
The bitumen. So we learnt one thing: one, we never dropped the ball, and two, we never went to ground.
Keep your feet.
Keep your feet. Now that was important because in the end, that was one of the reasons why both myself and Andrew in particular, and my brother Viv, who was another great footballer, we were exceptionally one pickup all the time.
Yeah.
We didn't have any issues with our ball handling.
I love it.
Yeah.
Now, you've also had a storied career in, council, in politics. You were on the Coburg City Council. You were an office bearer for Bob Hawke when he was the Prime Minister, his electorate of Wills in the ALP branch there. And then with the Essendon Football Club, you helped to get their governance in order in the 90s. Can you tell us about those experiences and how they've helped you, as we move into talking about ASTN, how they've helped to expand your mind about all the dimensions of government, of sport and the interaction of the two?
Good, because my dad and mum, particularly my dad, was a unionist, so very much we were very strong Labor supporters, and he was very strong. And my mum and dad, because they'd come from a colony called Cyprus, who went to become a republic, they left because they wanted to come to Australia where they thought, they might become a republic here. So my parents were Republicans and unionist and left wing very early in the piece. So that was instilled all the way through it, where it was give people an equal opportunity more so than anything else. So that shaped us. And so what happened when Malcolm Fraser got in 75, and by 81 I pretty well got sick of what the Liberals were doing in Australia. So I joined the Labor Party and got on the City Council. But also within the actual wheels of the ALP, the factions, I joined the right faction and I ended up getting a job as a secretary of the FEA, which is the Federal Electoral Assembly for Wills, with Bob Hawke as being the Prime Minister at the time. So that was great. And that led us obviously to go to Canberra a number of times and meet some of the great people like the Keatings and all those sort of people as well. So you'll learn from them what a vision for Australia is, from Hawke and Keating. Reform, competition, footprint into Asia, bring everyone up at the same time and never leave anyone behind, put a safety net behind people. And so all those things carried through. Now, by 1986, I could have become a politician and was offered, 86 to 88, I was offered 2 positions, either a state and then eventually a federal one. But I'd moved away and I didn't want to go into politics. I had a long talk to my wife in 85 and I had 3 kids at that stage and I wasn't prepared to give up family and everything for going to politics. And it was the right decisions because the people that took those positions, both divorced now, and so it was a very difficult time up in Canberra and coming back to Melbourne all the time. But all of that kept my values going, and so you can understand from what you're hearing is that I'm a very strong Labor supporter and really dislike the Liberal Party. So it's carried through. And I was also doing law in 1975 on the 11th of the 11th, 75, Kerr's Kerr. And I was doing constitutional law as well. And Gareth Evans was my lecturer, who ended up becoming a Minister for Government under Hawke. So you can just imagine what I thought of the Liberal Party in 75 when there was a mini coup basically that ended up taking over because the Governor-General made the decision and it wasn't elected, so we ended up doing, and that sort of all the way through was basically telling me that those people who had this background of private school and privilege were the people that we had to change and ensure that we brought everyone up at the same time and everything was an equal playing field.
Extraordinary. Such tumultuous times, the dismissal of 1975. All right, let's fast forward to 2012. So you've done this work at UCLA, one of the most prestigious tertiary organisations in the world. You've got that gearing of your mind around innovation, technology. Yeah. What was it that inspired you to actually do something in that space in Australian sports tech?
So in 2001, after the scholarship, I started working for a startup here.
Okay.
And I got this. That's how I went back to UCLA. And the problem was, I realised with a whole lot of other companies that come over, how Australians were so ill prepared for technology commercialisation and the inability to be able to pitch and raise money to people in the United States. The United States had, it's got 3 generations of commercialisation in a true sense.
Yep.
Australia was really just starting and we were really not good at it. And so I'm sitting there watching these 20 people try to pitch to these United States, sort of VCs and other people, and it was an embarrassment. And I came back and I thought, well, this has got to change.
In what way was it an embarrassment? What were we lacking?
Lacked knowledge on, basically the pathway, how it all works.
Yeah.
We lacked the tools to be able to do this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a lot of market research, and we just didn't know a lot of things about the whole process, about taking an idea right through to a global company, the series of raisings you need to do from seed, Series A, Series B, Series C. Didn't understand about what an exit was. They just didn't understand all that intricacy. And more importantly, they didn't understand the word differentiation. People need to understand that a startup that's successful is 20% technology and 80% business model.
Yeah.
And that's very important because you've got to differentiate yourself.
Yeah.
And so we didn't know how to differentiate ourselves. So one of the books they gave us over there was a Moore's book called Crossing the Chasm. Okay. I still have the book. Right. And I still got pages 84 to 85 penciled because in there is the secret sauce formula, which is, I still preach it to this very day, about how they have it the 32nd, so basically saying my company is A, B, C, D that does so-and-so. It overcomes the current problems of A, B, C, D, which these companies propensate, and our company is much different because it does A, B, C, D.
Yeah, right.
And it's a 30-second pitch.
Yeah.
And they didn't even know that. So I came back and I thought, this has got to change. And then in 2010-11, I started doing a little bit of consultancy with some sports tech companies that down in Geelong, and they asked me to go to a workshop in October 11, and Professor Jerry Engels was taking the workshop. I've still got the agenda and the minutes to this day.
Yeah, right.
And so from there though, but you could see there were a whole lot of companies there. Yes, they were okay, and they were, some of them are lifestyle, but others were starting to really go, like Catapult was there. But there was still no one who showed leadership. And a lot of my leadership in everything I've done has been an accidental leadership where people have sat there and said, what do we do now? And someone's, well, being the oldest of my family, the attitude is you've just got to take it on and show the leadership. So I said, look, I'll take it on. I'll become your first founding chair. And I then had Kate Lundy, was the Minister for Sport. Fortunately, I knew Kate from my days of Sports Without Borders.
Okay.
She was the Minister for Multiculturalism.
Yeah, right.
So that was great. So when I went to her and I said, this is what we want to do, she said, I'll see what I can do. She got that money corralled from Prime Minister and Cabinet within 26 days.
Jeez.
We made an application and 26 days later, we got a grant letter saying we're going to go. Because like everything in government, in April and May, there's always spare pots of money that the public servants haven't spent. So we were able to get that initial seed funding in 2012 and we went from there.
It's an amazing journey you've been on, because when you started this process in 2012, through that 26 days, the magic that came to fruition, the industry in Australia is worth about $250 million. Yep. The latest report now that we can reveal, the industry in this country, $3 billion.
Correct.
$3 billion off the back of 250 in the space of 10 years, in no small part thanks to you and your team. Tell us what that means. Like in tangible terms, how does that feel, the fact that you've been able to grow it in the way you have, you and your team, to bring this industry up? Sports technology now accounts for 10% of Australia's overall sports industry. It's amazing.
Yeah. I go back to my parents' values that, one of the things you are doing is always paying forward.
Yeah.
So, my parents used to share this saying with me that, we are here to be able to plant trees that eventually we will never see the shade of.
Yeah, right.
So
I like that.
So that was what the philosophy was. So I look back now and I can say, well, look, how many people are privileged enough and blessed to be a custodian that's taking an industry from here to here in 10 years and building an industry. People can build companies, but people rarely build an industry sector in a country.
Spot on.
So we were able to build, I had a great team. Craig Hill was our founding CEO, did a great job. He was the builder with me. And we basically, and you remember, in those 10 years, especially for the first 8 years, there was only 3 people that put this together.
Yeah, right.
3 people. I was an unpaid volunteer chair.
Yeah, right.
Craig was the only one paid, and then we had 2 or 3 and a few board members, and we put an industry together with 3. So it's a story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And that's the story. And effectively, we were on our knees in 2016-17 because we got right, because by that stage, Craig had been burnt out. He'd done a fantastic job. We got Rachel Piastri to come in and consolidate everything. And then in 2017-18, very momentous decisions. We got John Danaher, an old friend of mine, Major in the Army, great at people management and leadership. He came in and steadied the ship totally. And he also knew how to say no to people, which is good. Very important to be able to say no every so often. And then Martin Schlegel and John Persico came on, and that gave us new blood, new impetus, and they were real workers. And that was, and they were able. Then we were able to get some grants. LaunchFic were also very responsible for giving us that initial grants in 2016. Very important, LaunchFic. And they gave us the accelerator, the pre-accelerators, and then what we did is the other most important thing was in 2013 we brought over Steve Blank, billionaire, great proponent of the lean launchpad methodology, Professor Jerry Engel, and they helped us build the playbook to win globally. So we started our phrase called Born Global or Die Local. So we changed the mindset from lifestyle companies to global companies from day one. And that is one of the reasons that you saw this huge directory, because the conference when we brought them over, we had almost 800 people come to that conference, and they were taught by the best people for 4 days what it's like to do this in America and how you do it in your region.
Well, you've got some great examples of that. I mean, you think Nathan Rothschild, GTG Network.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Melbourne startup that's gone and dominating fan engagement in the UK, USA and Europe. You even look at Bennett Merriman, Rostify. It's a business from a garage in Geelong they do the Commonwealth Games, FIFA World Cup, Super Bowl, all the workforce management technologies. There are these great Aussies that are out there on the world stage, thanks to what you're doing to help them, give that opportunity. James, how big is government, like the role of these funding, these lifelines, the ability to help? My understanding is that Victorian government has spent something like, I think it might be about $10 million, and you've helped to turn that into about $500 million of economic productivity.
In Victoria, it's 1.2 billion.
1.2 billion.
So if you look at the whole figures, 3.2 billion, 120 company, we're now 660 companies. Very important. There was 2,500 employees, now 10,000 employees. If we add in wagering and others, we get to 15,000 people. So government is important for us. The state government of Victoria has sunk the money in. Their return on investment's pretty good, very good. We now want the feds to step up, because in 2013, which was critical, we had won a big award for a grant for $10 million, and the Abbott government completely took it off us when they got in. So we have effectively had to sort of do this with one arm behind our back. We want the feds now to step up and do what we should have done in 2013, which is to roll this out nationally, because we're the only group in this country that's got a playbook. From the moment a person has an idea to the moment they go global, there is a program of knowledge, knowledge products and trade missions. We started in 2016. We've had 18 trade missions into all these countries, which is the way that we've been able to break into these countries and give them market entry modes, etc. So the tools, we gave them the tools, we gave them the VCs, so we gave them market access, we gave them funding access, and then we gave them the ability to pick the right people
Yeah.
to help them achieve what they wanted to do. And that's education and training and a hell of a lot of, leap of faith.
Well, that's it. And Queensland government's been good recently.
Yeah, great.
Sterling Hinchcliffe, Minister for Sport, they're speaking about the legacy that they want to create in Queensland around Brisbane 2032 to have Brisbane as the sports tech hub of the world.
Yep.
So ASTN working arm in arm to achieve those goals. All right, James, before we go, tell us, all right, we're going to sit down again in 10 years. I'm going to hold you to it.
Yep.
We're going to have this chat maybe in the same room. And we're going to talk about what you've achieved in this next 10-year period. What do you see? What's happening in the next 10 years for sports tech in this country?
Well, first of all, we're going to have some younger people also help us.
Yeah.
Take over a lot of the roles. That's the first thing, because we've got to pay forward, right? Second thing, we're going to make sure that we have some great themes around women in sport. We've got to get more women in sports tech. Very important. 50% of your population, and we've only got 5% of them in startups. It's not right. We need to talk about environment, social and governance, ESG. It's the green stuff. We've got to talk about how ESG impacts the way we run events, the way we run our businesses. 70% of all funds in the world now are attracted to ESG systemised practice companies. Very important. So we've got to talk about those sort of big issues. We've got to talk about where XR, VR, sports data ethics is going to go in the next 10 years. So these are some of the big headline things that we've got to... What is the impact now of AI, blockchain, XR and all of these other new technologies? What does that mean for sport participation? Will we have the Olympics the way we've got them in 40 years' time? Or will we have, cyborgs or, machines doing stuff? So, we're talking about new sports like drone racing. So what we're saying is that our next 10 years is a journey of developing and rolling out the 10 themes, which is in our report over the next 10 years. It also means that we are going to leave a legacy for Australia, hopefully after 2032 Olympics. But more importantly, we need to build another 600 to 700 companies and another 200 to 300 companies, of which we will have a number of unicorns as well. That's the vision. And more importantly, we've got to increase the participation of Australians, because we have a policy which is called, enhancing the human performance of people of all abilities.
Yeah, 100%.
We've got to take care of people that are disabled,
100%.
all abilities. We've got to look after all that stuff. And we've also got to make sure that sport, fitness and health also impact into mental health to be able to assist people with their well-being going forward. These are all the sort of big issues I think that we will do in the next 10 years.
I've got no doubt you will. Every time you have a vision, it comes to fruition.
I've got some great people though. Really, we've got some very good people.
It's an amazing legacy, James. It's a lifetime of hard yakka and great results. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for your company as we celebrate the 10-year anniversary of ASTN.
You've been listening to Sports Cutting Edge for the Australian Sports Technologies Network. For more, jump online at astn.com.au.